Hello, my friends. I'm Nora, and today I want to take you through this story slowly and carefully, because what happened in the Hunt family home wasn't just a violent crime. It revealed how control, rejection, and buried rage can grow into something so catastrophic that it tears apart every life it touches. This is a story about a family whose kindness was used against them, a young woman who tried to choose herself, and a man who believed her independence was an unforgivable betrayal. When you hear the name Hunt, if you live in the UK or follow horse racing, you probably think of a calm, familiar voice describing the thundering hooves of racehorses across the finish line. John Hunt, a broadcaster with decades of devotion to his craft, had built a life defined not by fame, but by love. Love for his wife Carol and for the 3 daughters they raised together in a quiet Hertfordshire village. Their home in Bushey wasn't grand or flashy. It was simply warm, lived in, full of small comforts and family memories. A place where you could imagine the kettle always ready to boil, a dog waiting by the door, and laughter drifting across the rooms. Inside that home, something beautiful had been built. 3 daughters who grew up close, who talked in the way sisters do when they trust one another completely, who knew each other's moods before a word was spoken. Louise, the youngest at 25, was the gentle soul of the family, the kind of woman who could calm an anxious dog just by speaking softly to it. When the world shut down during the COVID pandemic, she didn't retreat from life. She created something. Her dog grooming business, Groom Glow, began as a simple idea in the garden, a small pod with a table, tools, and a belief that kindness matters in even the smallest acts. Her clients adored her, they trusted her, and they saw the compassion in her long before they ever understood the danger that compassion would place her in. Her mother, Carol, was 61 and known by nearly everyone in their community. She attended church every Sunday, not because she felt obligated, but because she believed in showing up for people. She had a warmth that radiated through every interaction, the kind of kindness that made even strangers feel like they mattered. She met John in a nightclub decades earlier, a chance encounter that led to a life defined by loyalty, partnership, and devotion. Their oldest daughter, Hannah, was 28, a beautician at a clinic where clients lined up for her not because she was simply skilled, but because they felt safe in her chair. She was loved deeply by her boyfriend, who would later describe her as an angel. And there was Amy, the middle sister, whose strength would become an anchor for the family after everything fell apart. To anyone looking from the outside, the Hunts were one of those rare families who had managed to hold on to something pure: closeness, stability, and love. And perhaps that is part of why this story feels so painful. Because what happened next wasn't an accident. It wasn't a moment of madness. It was the result of weeks of planning and years of unresolved anger growing inside a man who believed he had the right to control a woman who finally chose to walk away from him. Louise met Kyle Clifford sometime in late 2022. At first glance, he appeared to be an ordinary young man, 25 years old, former soldier, working as a security guard. He had that clean-cut presence you might associate with someone who once wore a uniform. Quiet, polite, seemingly well-mannered. He came into the Hunt home often, joining their family dinners, sitting at their table, sharing their laughter. John Hunt would later say he never once heard raised voices between Kyle and Louise. Nothing about him seemed threatening. In fact, he seemed almost eager to be part of the warmth this family created. But that was only the surface. Beneath it, something darker lived inside him. Kyle came from a family marked by violence. His older brother, Bradley, was serving a life sentence for murder, a brutal, remorseless attack that left a teenager dead. That alone didn't condemn Kyle, of course. Families are complicated. Trauma passes in unpredictable ways. But the seeds of something were already there, tucked quietly behind the polite smile he wore in the Hunt household. As the months passed, cracks began to appear, not the dramatic kind, not screaming matches or visible threats, but subtle, insidious changes. Louise's friends noticed she stopped wearing makeup, not because she didn't want to, but because Kyle didn't approve. They noticed he discouraged her from going out. He controlled who she saw. He grew jealous easily, possessively, irrationally. He had sudden bursts of rage behind the wheel, screaming at strangers in traffic, pounding the steering wheel. Louise would sit beside him, embarrassed, uncomfortable, shrinking a little each time his anger flared. She saw things in him that frightened her, though she didn't always say it out loud. He once showed her and her friends a video of an animal being harmed, the kind of video most people couldn't even watch, and he laughed, not nervously, not out of shock, but because he found it funny. Her friends looked at each other, confused and unsettled. Something was wrong. What Louise didn't know was that while he was policing her life, he was secretly active on dating apps, messaging other women, pretending to be available, hiding entire conversations behind her back. He had built a web of deception that contradicted his possessive obsession with her. At work, colleagues noticed his inappropriate behavior toward women, comments that revealed deep-seated misogyny, entitlement, and immaturity. And still, Louise tried to make it work. She tried to be patient, to be kind, to believe he could be better. But the truth was already written. She just hadn't found the strength to read it yet. 5 days before she died, she finally put her fears into words. In a note on her phone titled, "When You're Sad, Look," she described his racist comments, his transphobia, his belittling of her, his frightening temper. It was a message to herself, a reminder that she wasn't imagining the red flags. She wasn't overreacting. She was documenting the truth she had been too gentle, or too afraid, to say out loud. By June 2024, Louise had reached her breaking point. She confided in friends. She cried. She admitted that the relationship wasn't love anymore. It was control. It was fear. It was suffocation. And on June 26th, she finally did what so many women struggle to do. She ended it, calmly, respectfully, and with maturity. John later described it as the kind of breakup every parent hopes their child will have when ending a relationship. Gentle, thoughtful, compassionate. Louise didn't blame Kyle. She didn't attack him. She simply explained that she couldn't be with someone who hurt her. She was choosing herself. And Kyle pretended to accept it. To the Hunt family, it seemed almost too easy. He didn't cry. He didn't shout. He didn't demand explanations. He just nodded, said he understood, and walked away. Louise breathed a sigh of relief, grateful he hadn't made it harder than it already was. But inside him, something snapped. Rejection, to a man like Kyle, wasn't just a loss. It was humiliation. It was a wound to his ego. And in his mind, humiliation demanded revenge. Within hours of the breakup, he was online researching crossbows, weapons, rope, duct tape. He studied John Hunt's schedule. He scrolled through Carol's Facebook posts for clues about when she might be home. He checked the weather forecast for the 9th of July, the day he planned to strike. He bought the crossbow. He bought a butcher knife. He tried to buy a CO2 pistol. He wrote letters to his family drenched in self-pity, insisting he couldn't live without Louise, ignoring the multiple women he was secretly dating on the side. And each day, he planned a little more. 13 days of preparation, 13 days of waking up, breathing, eating, and thinking about one thing, punishing Louise for leaving him. On the night before the murders, he watched videos from Andrew Tate, absorbing toxic narratives about dominance, control, and revenge. It was fuel poured onto the fire already burning inside him. And then came the morning of July 9th. You might imagine a killer pacing, sweating, acting strangely. But Kyle wasn't restless. He went to a garden center with his parents and his niece. He smiled. He pushed a trolley. He looked ordinary. That's the frightening part. Evil isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it blends in perfectly. His weapons were already in his car. At 1:40 p.m., Kyle parked near the Hunt home. He watched. He observed. He checked who was home. He confirmed that John was away, reporting on a horse racing event, something Kyle had meticulously tracked. And at 2:32 p.m., he walked up to the front door carrying a rucksack and a lie. When Carol opened the door, she saw the same young man she had welcomed into her home for over a year. She saw someone she believed was hurting from a breakup, and she responded the way she always did, with kindness. She told him to get support. She encouraged him to seek help. She tried to comfort him. He stabbed her in the hallway 1 minute later. She had no chance to defend herself, no chance to run. He attacked her with a level of rage and brutality that defies understanding. And then, when she was dying on the floor of her own home, he waited. 35 minutes, watching, ensuring she was dead. While he waited, customers walked through the side gate to the garden pod to pick up their freshly groomed dogs, completely unaware that the woman who owned the home lay lifeless inside. The Hunt home looked normal from the outside. That's the most chilling part. The horror was just steps away, unseen. At 3:07 p.m., Kyle retrieved his crossbow from his car. He covered it with a blanket. He stepped over Carol's body, and he waited for Louise to return home. At 4:11 p.m., the door opened. You might imagine a scream lasting seconds, but the doorbell camera captured 15 minutes of pure terror. Louise discovering her mother's body, Louise trying to escape, Louise realizing she was trapped, Louise begging, Louise fighting, Louise doing everything she could to survive. But Kyle had already decided she wouldn't. He restrained her, he humiliated her, he degraded her, he used tape, rope, and threats. He isolated her from the entire world. And at 5:31 p.m., he used her phone to text her father, asking when he'd be home, trying to determine how much time he had left. He searched online for how to disconnect smoke detectors. He was planning to burn the house down. At 6:49 p.m., Hannah arrived home. She called her mother. No answer. She walked into the house. Seconds later, Kyle shot Louise in the back with a crossbow bolt, killing her instantly. Hannah called out for her mother, her voice echoing through the house. She climbed the stairs. She saw Kyle. And she didn't run. She shouted at him, brave, furious, desperate to protect her family even in that moment of terror. She managed to text her boyfriend, "Call police immediately to mine now. Kyle here. Police now. He's tying us up." She set her phone to silent. She tried to hide it. She tried to save them. 2 minutes later, Kyle shot her in the chest. When she collapsed, he fled. Cowardice was the only consistent thing in his life. But Hannah wasn't finished fighting. Despite the crossbow bolt lodged in her chest, despite her injuries, despite the horror she had witnessed, she managed to call 999. She gave the address. She told the operator she thought she was dying. She told them her mother and sister were dead. And then the call cut out. Her bravery saved her father's life. If she hadn't made that call, he would have walked into that house, unaware of the carnage waiting for him. By the time armed police arrived, all 3 women were gone. Kyle drove away, hidden under a blanket of his own false calm. He abandoned his car. He hid in a cemetery for nearly 22 hours, too cowardly to face the consequences of what he had done. When police finally approached him, he shot himself with the same crossbow he had used to kill Louise and Hannah. The self-inflicted injury left him paralyzed from the chest down. He survived. For months, he refused to attend court. He denied charges. He lied. He performed his self-pity until the very end. But the evidence was overwhelming. DNA, tape residue, CCTV, messages, searches. Every detail painted a picture of a man who planned, stalked, executed, and fled with full intent. Eventually, he pleaded guilty to the murders. A jury found him guilty of raping Louise. And at 26 years old, he received 3 whole-life orders. He will die in prison. But the heart of this story isn't Kyle Clifford. It's Carol, who opened her door with kindness. It's Louise, who tried to choose herself after finding the strength to walk away. It's Hannah, whose final moments were defined by extraordinary courage. And it's John Hunt, who lost the world he built because one man decided a woman's independence was a crime worthy of death. When John addressed the court, he said he hoped women everywhere would take Louise's bravery as a beacon, a reminder that choosing yourself is not weakness. Walking away is not failure. Ending a toxic relationship is not unkindness. And he's right. The beacon shines because the darkness never gets the final word. Not in their home, not in their legacy, and not in the voices who continue telling their story. I'm Nora, and thank you for allowing me to walk with you through this one. If you or someone you care about is facing control, fear, or manipulation, please know that help exists, and you never have to walk alone.